In the end of 2024, the perceptions over the state of the global economy are not good. Even though statistical figures show that the main economies are growing, the public does not feel like it. It is therefore relevant to analyze what is happening in the world economy from a long-term perspective. To perform such an analysis, it is best to present a theory about the cyclical nature of global economic growth. The cyclical patterns of economic growth were the topic of discussion after a Russian statistician, Nikolai Kondratyev, published his paper in 1922. In the paper, he predicted that Western capitalism would get into a crisis within the coming decade. He proved to be correct. Although he was correct and gave hope to the Soviet regime, Kondratyev still got into prison for his economic views. The reason was simple. He also predicted that Western capitalism would overcome the crisis and might become even more prosperous. Up until today, he has been the only economist that got into prison owing to his views. After his prediction that Western economies would recover proved true, he died in a labor camp in 1936. Kondratyev examined long-term interest rates, the production and price evolution of coal, steel, wheat, and woolen, and he based his hypothesis on these long-term trends. His main claim was that liberal democracies that implemented free market capitalism experience a 50 to 60 years long waves of economic growth, and in the upswing phase of the waves, social revolutions are more likely. In his time, his research was popular, and others, such as Simon Kuznets and to an extent Joseph Schumpeter, also worked on the elaboration of long-term waves of economic development. Kuznets emphasized the relevance of a 20 to 25 years long fluctuation of infrastructure investments owing to the housing needs of new generations. Meanwhile, Schumpeter derived the fluctuations from the varying waves of optimism and pessimism of those who fund the investments that are the roots of development. By the 1980s, mainstream economic research abandoned the examination of long-term trends because it seemed that the price and production tendencies no longer showed cyclical patterns. Among the main researchers, I highlight Solomos Solomou, who proved that the long-term waves that Kondratyev identified had been the consequences of the catch-up of new European nation-states, such as Germany, to the most developed countries of the late 19th century, for example Great Britain and the United States. As a surprise, military and social experts restarted the research on the long-term economic fluctuations at the beginning of the 2000s. There was a security conference dedicated to this topic in Madrid in 2004, where Russian scientists were invited alongside experts from NATO member states. It was at this time when I met the works of George Swahulai, who developed a methodologically grounded model for the evolution of human thinking, philosophy, and published his research in 2007. It is available only in Hungarian. The evolution of human thinking follows a periodic pattern that is also reflected in economic growth. Among many cyclical patterns, Swahulai described the time interval of humanity's reformations of religious thinking, which is 588 years. Within this time frame, there are three 196-year-long periods, the thesis, antithesis, synthesis, trinity, for philosophical reflection, when public experience about social practices creates awareness. And all 196-year-long periods can be divided into four 49-year-long intervals that are the length of various ideologies, human attitudes alongside which generations organize their social and political life. This wave of research of the long-term economic and social trends in the early 2000s were partly triggered by the works of Angus Maddison, an economic historian, who attempted to estimate the country's GDP data in purchasing power parity terms. He established the Madison Project, a research agenda that was first operated by the OECD. Now the project is run by economists in the Netherlands. Their leader is Jutta Bolt. Madison first published his time series in 2003. In this first publication, he could assess the GDP for all countries for 1820. However, it was not a continuous time series for all countries. The time series ended in 2001. This dataset was crucial for a researcher who intended to analyze the long-term economic trends. Later in 2014, the Madison Project, after the passing of the founder Angus Madison, published an extended and revised dataset. This included GDP data between 1820 and 2008, so the effects of the global financial crisis were included too. The reason why the start of the period is 1820 is simple. It was during the Napoleonic Wars when states realized the significance of macroeconomic figures, and the coherent data collection could start by the early 1820s. In my research, I could use both datasets. To get the key results, economists have to apply spectral analysis to filter out which cyclical component, a sinus wave, has the largest contribution to the variance of the time series. When we find the given cyclical component, it is crucial to test whether the contribution to the variance is still by chance, or there is a statistically significant correlation with the referred component. To my surprise, there was no significant presence of any cyclical components in the individual countries' datasets. I checked the 23 economically most relevant countries. This confirmed the former research results that the Kondratyev wave did not exist. The results were the same both for the time series ending in 2001 and 2008. However, for the global data, the research of the time series corroborated the existence of the 196-year-long cycle. The 180-year-long period was the most significant in the case of the time series ending in 2001. The 188-year-long cyclical component had an even greater contribution to the variance. Finally, in 2019, there was a third dataset by which I could revisit the research with the former time series, and this time series ended in 2016. So, a full 196-year-long cycle was in examination. And this one had the most significant contribution to the variance in comparison to the former two results. Unfortunately, the Madison Project changed their data collection and estimation methodology after 2020, and the new datasets are not applicable for former comparisons. Nevertheless, I believe the 196-year-long cycle is the crucial one. Let's take a look at the visual representation of this cycle and what it suggests for the future. As the curve suggests, the average GDP growth globally is likely to fall until 2045. Then, a new upswing period will kick in. The graph shows further crucial empirical evidence too. The main upswing period of the past centuries started in 1849 and lasted until 1947. This was a period when natural science gave optimism to most people, inventions created trust for politicians too, to finance not just those inventions but major wars as well. In a weird sense, Kondratyev's notions that during the upswing periods of cycle there are wars more often is right, but the upswing period is actually 98 years long, not 25 or 30 as Kondratyev thought. During the downswing periods, there are less wars. Therefore, the bad news that until 2045 humankind will not see another general upswing is the good news as well for the near future. We do not have to expect another open world war. None of the great powers is optimistic enough to initiate one. It is worth highlighting another aspect of the global time series. The highest GDP growth historically occurred between 1947 and 1971, when the world saw the post-war reconstruction and the zenith of the welfare state. Although the period between 1922 and 1947 was similarly strong in terms of opportunities, the volatility of the Great Depression and the Second World War diminished its opportunities. After the beginning of the 1980s, when neoliberalism became the mainstream economic regime, global growth could not return to the previous levels in terms of purchasing power. What's more, it contributed to its further fall. The evolution of the 49-year-long ideological cycles provides some more specific forecasts about the future of the global economy. Even though these cycles did not prove to be statistically significant, the development of ideologies is seemingly reflected in economic growth too. The next graph shows the stylized and positioned sinus curves that are relevant for our discussion. The long wave goes into negative territory first, then after 1898 it is in positive territory. Meanwhile, after 1996 it is negative again. The shorter 49-year-long sinus curves start into the positive territory first, then they turn into negative domain. Unfortunately, I can't say I fully deciphered the reasons for this. Regarding the 196-year-long cycle, what became clear to me by the correspondence I could have with George Fahuley, cyclical evolution of human thinking follows the logic of scientific revolutions in the form how Thomas Kuhn defined. When a new scientific paradigm is born, the success of the new paradigm does not arrive quickly. The old paradigm resists for an extended period. Therefore, the 196-year-long wave faces a downward trend first, owing to the opposition of the old systems, and the slowing economic growth reflects this period. Then, the success of the paradigm arrives when more and more actors follow it, and the resistance decreases, so the upswing phase can begin, which is mirrored in accelerating economic growth. 1800 as the beginning of the 196-year-long period is relevant. It is the date when Napoleon separated state issues from the church, so the secular state administration was first implemented. It has resistance, the Napoleonic Wars. However, after 1849, the nation-state as an idea could blossom, and until 1947, we could see a relevant upswing in economic activity as well. After 1947, the first critical problems of the nation-state started to appear, and this was accompanied by slowing economic growth. Regarding the 49-year-long periods, the ideologies need immediate economic success, otherwise they cannot spread. The picture shows how the idea of the welfare state and Keynesian economics could gain momentum after 1935, and also how the economic growth slowed down after 1959-1960. That year, the United States had a slight recession. Only one economist, Alan Greenspan, forecasted that recession. No wonder why he got the role of serving as the chair of the Federal Reserve later. By 1984, the welfare state got exhausted, and the new generation, the baby boomers, who were in their most successful periods of their careers, initiated the neoliberal reforms. Donald Trump is one member of this generation. Although he attempts to regenerate economic growth that he experienced as a young professional before the 1970s, what he will achieve is the final end of neoliberalism that will be replaced by 2033. He does not yet see it, but his planned economic measures, the high tariffs on American imports, would eventually lead to slowing global economic activity. It is now time to analyze the combined curve, the sum of the 196-year-long and the 49-year-long sinus curves. As in the case of the sinus curves, the local minimum and maximum points and the inflection points are the critical moments. In inflection points, the curve changes whether it is bending upwards, convex, or downwards, concave, and it is these points where it is the steepest. Only few economists analyzed the historical event of the long recession between 1873 and 1882. However, the shortest sinus curve had a local minimum in that period, therefore we see why the long recession occurred. Similarly, the Great Depression between 1929 and 1933 seems to be obviously happening in that given historical moment because the 49-year-long curve had its local minimum again. In terms of the not too distant past, in 1996, the 49-year-long sinus curve was already trending upwards. However, after 1996, it was in a slowing pace. The curve was concave. During 2008 and 2009, it reached a local maximum and turned down. This coincided with the GFC. This curve was trending downwards with the largest pace in its next inflection point during 2020 and 2021. It coincided with the COVID-19 pandemic, because the longer the 196-year-long sinus curve was trending downwards in 2020. Therefore, that year could not bring anything else than a huge crisis and a strong decline in economic activity. Similarly, the local minimum of the shorter 49-year-long curve will signify something else in the near future. By 2033, this curve will reach its local minimum. This will mean a new economic ideology and regime that will replace the current neoliberal ideology. The question is, what sort of new ideology will appear? It might be easy to expect that after neoliberalism, we may have another phase of the welfare state. Although it seems likely, it may happen simultaneously with the economic separation of the democratic Western countries and the dominantly authoritarian states. In 2024, we live in the second 196-year-long cycle of the 588-year-long religious reformation period. This means that the former 196 years will be counted to an extent. While between 1800 and 1996, liberalism and globalization could form a popular tandem, in the current phase, conservative thinking and, to an extent, the reversal of globalization are likely. Therefore, the welfare state may reappear only in a more conservative framework. Conservatism and the reversal of globalization will cause further economic problems until 2033. The storm needs to pass.